Well, it is an absolute delight to be able to share this tutorial with you all. Hello, my name is Sarah Simon and I'm the Mint Gardener, and here are some fabulous dahlias mixed in with a few summer harvest flowers using some of my most favorite supplies. So as you can see, I have pre-sketched this piece. Lots of beautiful blooms, but not that much detail included in the sketch. I'm going to let the paint speak for itself. I did use colored pencils that have a watercolor edge to them so that the pigment will dissolve, so that the paint can really shine through. I am mixing up a little bit of the MaimeriBlu white, as well as the yellow, the Naples yellow, and the dragon blood. I am trying to create some really beautiful base colors. Our first wash layers are going to be exactly that. Collections of lovely little washes that are not super bright, but very transparent and just with a hint of color so that we can come back and add even more delight. So again, combinations of all of these beautiful favorite colors. I am using the titanium white 018, permanent red deep 253, Naples yellow, dragon's blood, hooker's green, and Payne's gray. A lovely collection of colors, and it's pretty incredible what you can create. So I'm working with my Velvetouch Princeton brushes. I alternate between all of the rounds. Round 6, round 4, round 1, just using bigger brushes to cover larger washes and smaller brushes to cover the smaller washes, and then also some of the glazing techniques, which we'll explore as this piece progresses. So I'm popping around using different dahlias and coloring as inspiration for the colors that I'm dropping in. Something I've learned with watercolor is if you can get the right combination of paint and water on your palette, you can see I'm just using a regular plate, a lot of the work is already done for you. So I am creating little mixes of color with just a tiny bit of water, because what I'm doing is putting that water on the page first. And then I'm letting that combination of about 50% water, 50% paint to then be dropped in, or using the technique watercolorists like to call wet in wet. So we're dropping wet paint in to a wet wash. Now, some of these dahlias I added brighter, bolder colors. So their base is going to be a little bit brighter and bolder, which alternates really beautifully with some of the other washes that I'm doing. Notice that the washes for these beautiful flowers, they are going all the way out to the edges of each boundary. What you find quickly with watercolor is paint follows water. So if your area and your paper is wet, like it is on the St. Cuthberts, your paper holds the water, and your water provides a boundary of how far your paint will go and move and shine. The paint cannot go outside of the water boundary. So that is a way a watercolor painter is able to somewhat control where the color goes. Now notice that I have, like what I say, I like to what to say is hopscotch around my piece. So I am being careful of putting some boundaries next to others. If things are very wet and I put another wet boundary next to it, there isn't going to be that hard drying line, which is going to provide that definition of the flower next to another. So in order to create these big, beautiful blooms of wet and wet color, I'm jumping around my piece, only wetting down certain boundaries, dropping in those colors where they're needed, and I'm able to isolate different color pockets so that I'm able to really keep certain dahlias yellow, and other dahlias have that beautiful sunrise look where I've dropped in the red and the yellow and the white, okay? And then here, this little piece, I'm adding in pops of dragon's blood, of course, because who doesn't need beautiful pops of dragon's blood? So for some of the smaller flowers, instead of starting with a clear wash, I actually started with just the paint and water mixture straight from the palette. So that is also an option, but what you're going to be able to see is those are definitely darker and brighter. Okay, so as watercolor dries, it's always about 10 to 20% lighter than when it's wet on your page. So if you want really beautiful, bold dahlias, of course, we're going to come back and add a few more layers. This is just our first layer. But knowing that in advance, you want to start lighter, but not so light that you don't even know you did any work, right? It's a balance. So that top dahlia that we worked on, you can see I've dropped in color, but it's still a very light, pale version of some of the others. So just keep that in mind as you're popping around. A piece is often viewed right at the end. The viewer is not with you usually throughout the entire creation piece. So they don't understand the care that it takes from a painter to really add that color contrast into each base wash and to build that balance into your full composition. So by doing some dahlias and some flower shapes darker, especially in this base wash, but some lighter, you're able to add interest and contrast into your piece, which makes it so much more exciting for your viewer to draw them in to see. Oftentimes that's what we see in a garden. There aren't all the same color flowers. And even within one flower, there's so much variation. So that's what I'm trying to do in this composition. Composition with a lot of flowers requires a lot of different interesting bases. Now, we don't have a lot of dark flowers in this piece, but we do have a few. So I've gone ahead and mixed up our red and our Payne's gray to make the most delightful burgundy deep red. Now I'm using this to really build in a base, almost like the shadows, the hinting at a flower that's maybe embedded deep in the bouquet that you may not see the full flower of, but this gives you an opportunity to define your boundaries and give yourself different interesting edges. Now, of course, a lot of dahlias do look like pom-poms. They are literally called pom-pom dahlias, and from a casual observer's eye, they do look like perfect circles. But once you spend time with flowers, you start to look closer and you start to observe, which is one of the greatest talents of an artist and one of the most delightful ways to observe a flower is to really lean in and look closer. And you find even the perfect circular pom-pom dahlias are not exactly circular. There are hard edges. There are rounds. There are long rectangles. There are hard triangles. So as an observer, when you're looking in the garden or looking at flowers and starting to mix up your shapes and represent them on your plate, palette, and on your actual piece, it helps to actually spend some time either Googling images or looking in the garden. Much to the delight of every photographer and artist, we have pictures of flowers to observe in the winters. So if you look up the dahlia flower and all the different varietals, you'll be able to see all these different shapes, no matter what season you're in, no matter what climate you live in. I recognize dahlias don't grow in every corner of our beautiful big world that we all live in, but because of the internet, we can Google images. So these are dahlia flowers. I've mixed in a few zinnias. And now I'm really trying to represent some of the greenery. This bouquet in particular didn't have a lot of greenery, but I wanted to make sure that I added some green because, as many of us know, green is the contrast and perfect complement to red tones. And you don't often spend time in a garden without observing a lot of green. So I wanted to make sure I gave a little shout out to the greens. I've switched to my round 4 here. As you can see, I'm working and I'm dabbing in some mixtures of the Hooker's green and the Naples yellow. One of the reasons I love working with the Naples yellow is it has a slight opacity to it. So you're able to get kind of a creamy yellow, and when you mix it with the hooker's green, you can bring it all the way to this really delightful light olive green. And again, we want to start lighter in watercolor so that as we come back with darker glazes, we're able to slowly build our color and thus our interest and contrast in our piece and our full composition. So right now I'm coming back for a glaze layer. This is called a wet on dry layer as well. What I'm doing is creating interesting wash shapes within each flower boundary. And I'm taking this opportunity to build our gradation in color. This is when we introduce midtones. Watercolor, what we're working with is some of our lighter tones, all the way to some of the darker tones, which we'll play with at the end, which will definitely use some of that purple that we mixed up for some of our darker tones. But what I want to capture right now are these midtones. Now you'll notice some of these washes, I'm not bringing them all the way out to the entire boundary of our dahlia flowers, okay? I will have interesting hard lines within each of these boundaries. You can see I created one there and I'm creating one now. I'm creating wash boundaries. So they're wash glazes and then I'm dropping in the wet and wet color, but I'm not filling the entire flower. This gives me, again, another interesting contrast layer. There's going to be parts of these dahlias that stay almost the white of the page, almost that reserved white. But then there's going to be other parts in the same dahlia flower that have several layers of color. And that's the joy of watercolor. You get to view a piece almost as if you're observing from multiple stained glass windows. Some of these dahlias will have deep, rich tones. Others will stay almost the white of the page. And that's your prerogative as the artist. Now, I've also mixed in a few ranunculus and zinnias, which you can see I am now painting up. They're not going to have the same petal shapes, but if you're wanting to create a piece like this, but make it your own, adding in zinnias and ranunculus with the watercolor dahlias is always going to be a great choice because they're in the same color palette, and colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, analogous colors, are friends. And they like to say, there's an old saying that says colors across the way from each other, those are the contrasting colors. They complement each other beautifully. Those are lovers. So if you mix lots of friends and lovers in a composition, you're always going to be able to create a piece that sings together. All right. So now I'm going in with my smaller brush. And I'm also adding another glazed wet on dry layer, wet paint on dry paint, building in that deepening of color. I am darkening some of the leaves and just the edges of the stems to the flowers so that, again, I can add interest and shadow. I am not going over the entire boundary. I'm just highlighting interesting tidbits, okay? So again, just building in that contrast. Truly, when you're watercoloring, the first layers of watercolor are actually the quickest. You don't have to be as mindful, but as you start to build in layer after layer, you're actually moving slower, you're working with smaller brushes, and you're deepening your watercolor. So now our consistency in our palette is more 80% paint, 20% water. I like to joke and say that if you're mixing up these mixes on your plate palette, you're mixing up the perfect soy sauce with a touch of wasabi. A watercolor artist has great respect for the potency of the color of the paint, and the incredible saturation that comes out of these MaimeriBlu tubes is incredible. You can use it very sparingly. A watercolor artist is primarily using paint. Hence, if you want to follow my food analogy, if you're eating sushi, you know that the wasabi is the incredibly potent seasoning that you will mix in with your soy sauce. A little goes a long way. And that's what I'm doing. Managing that mixture on my plate allows me to not only deepen the colors that I'm using to then add these little petal shapes, but it also allows me to kind of play within this full range of color. Now notice, see, I just switched over my plate palette. I'm now working in a mixture of the yellow and the red, and that gives me more of a mango mixture, where before I was mixing in the dragon's blood and the red, and that gives me a deeper red mixture. And all of these can be used as you build in these wet on dry glazes. So again, we're coming back with a third layer of wash. This piece, you could do about 20 layers. And if you did it even bigger on a larger sheet of paper, you could do even more. Each layer builds the realistic deep dive that an artist does. Now, this is a little ranunculus flower. Again, I'm using my very, very thin Velvetouch round 1 to build in these thin layers and to trace in the petal lines over the first 2 wet on dry washes that I've already added. Now you can look through these photos of the finished piece to really study each flower and how I represented it again, or you can look online and find some really gorgeous photo references to build your own bouquet. I would highly recommend. And if an entire bouquet feels overwhelming, this piece can be broken down into small sketch studies where you do just one flower, all right? Just try one flower. Sometimes it's overwhelming to dive into a piece like this, and then you end up not finishing and really pushing yourself. But if you were to take one flower out of this, like this one, for example, and wait in between drying times, and then slowly build in each of these layers to really understand how I'm building this piece, you will be able to be better equipped to build a full bouquet. So again, if a full bouquet feels overwhelming, start with one flower. See how it feels. You'll get the hang of it, and then you'll feel like, gosh, I want to build 2 flowers or 3, or I really like how this flower turned out or this flower turned out in Sarah's piece, and then you can replicate those. But again, I want you to see how I'm building this. Do you see how we build this extra layer, this glaze, this wet on dry third layer in many pieces of this flower? But when you put this glaze over the flower, the white of that, this beautiful paper really shines through, and the flower ends up looking like it's being touched by sunshine. You're able to build in new boundaries, darken pieces of it, but by having a wash glazed layer on more the right side of the flower and a lighter bit on the left, you're able to see a full range of contrast within this one flower, which it's really fun now that you've seen how I'm able to back build this in, okay? Again, doing it with this flower. Each flower you can take one at a time and slowly build it in. This is a piece that is a delight to come back to time and time again, to try new ways, to try new color combinations, to mix up new colors, to keep building in darker and darker layers and slowly build in all the beauty. So now I'm taking straight hooker's green, building in the deeper leaves, adding in that interesting veining on leaves, adding in individual petals on this pretty little dahlia. Now this ranunculus, I'm coming back and adding detail. It's also fun to kind of experiment. Not every flower needs detail. Sometimes a flower fading off into the background is a great break for your eye. Composition isn't just about building in interesting colors that are friends and lovers. It's also building in interesting textures, giving the eye breaks and rhythms. I hope you've enjoyed this beautiful piece, and I cannot wait to see what you create with your own imagination and these beautiful supplies.